When you think about the history of the NFL, you think about these huge, legendary teams. But what if I told you the league's very first champion is a team you've probably never even heard of, a team that won it all and then just vanished? So let me just ask you a quick question. If I said, name the first NFL champions, who comes to mind? The Packers, the Bears, maybe? The Giants? I mean, they're all legendary teams, right? Totally solid guesses, but they're all wrong.
Believe it or not, the answer is the 1920 Akron Pros. Yeah, that's them right there in the photo. This is a team that was right there at the very birth of the NFL. They won the first title ever, and then, poof, they were basically erased from the history books. So how in the world did that happen?
All right, so to figure out how this totally forgotten team managed to win the very first championship, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the world they came from, which was, well, it was the wild, chaotic, pre-league era of football.
Yeah, you got to forget everything you know about the slick, organized NFL we watch today. Back then, pro football was this chaotic regional free-for-all, especially in all those industrial towns in Ohio. This wasn't some grand league. It was basically just town teams battling it out for local bragging rights and, a little bit of cash on the side.
And smack dab in the middle of all that chaos was the team that would eventually become the Pros. And trust me, their history was every bit as wild and unstable as the time they were playing in.
Okay, so you have to meet this guy, Peggy Parrott. He was the player, the coach, and the owner-manager. Back in the early 1910s, he basically was the team. And the way he ran it, well, it was less like a modern franchise and way more like his own personal fantasy team.
And this is where you really start to see just how different things were back then. See, Parrett's whole strategy was super simple. Get the absolute best players you can for this Sunday's game. That's it. He'd go out and hire big-time college stars. We're talking even future legends like Knute Rockne for just a single game. The lineup was always changing. It was full of these ringers who, might be playing for a rival town the very next week. It was nuts.
And that instability, you can see it right in their name. They started out as the Akron Indians, then they became Parrott's Indians, then the Akron Burkharts when a local brewery took over for a bit. This kind of constant churn was pretty typical for the time, but let's be real, it's no way to build a real, lasting organization.
But then, in 1920, everything started to change. A bunch of team owners decided it was finally time to bring some order to all this chaos. And kind of shockingly, this little team from Akron was right at the center of the whole thing.
So the team gets sold to a couple of local businessmen, Art Ranney and Frank Need. And they gave the team a new, much more professional-sounding name, the Akron Pros. And these guys, they had a vision that went way, way beyond just winning the next game on the schedule. You see, they joined this brand new venture, the American Professional Football Association, or the APFA. And this was the direct forerunner of the NFL we know today. It was founded in September of 1920, with this big goal of creating a stable national league.
And get this, the Akron Pros weren't just, members of this new league. They were foundational to it. I mean, the official minutes from that very first meeting where they formed the league, they were literally written on Akron Pros team stationery. The team's owner, Art Ranney, even got elected as the league's very first secretary-treasurer. These guys were helping write the rule book from day one.
Okay, so with a new league and a new name, the Pros head out for their first season. And what a season it turned out to be. It would go down as one of the most dominant, and pretty controversial, in the league's entire history.
Just look at that final record. 8 wins, 0 losses, and 3 ties. For the time, that was basically perfect. I mean, this was a league where just surviving the season was a victory in itself. And the Pros didn't lose a single game. Not one.
And they weren't just squeaking by with wins. They were dominating. They kicked off the season with a 43-0 demolition job. They beat the mighty Canton Bulldogs, who everyone thought was the best team in the country, twice. And then, in this huge late-season game, they managed to hold the Decatur Staleys, a team led by young George Halas, to a scoreless tie. Super crucial. Okay, but here's where things got a little controversial. If you look at the standings, both the Decatur Staleys and the Buffalo All-Americans actually had more wins than Akron did. So you're probably asking, how did the Pros end up as the champs? Well, the rules back in 1920 were just different. Ties didn't really count against you, and the only thing that really mattered was losses. And Akron, they were the only team to get through the entire season without a single defeat.
But even then, the title wasn't automatic. It had to be put to a vote at a league meeting the next April. And guess who was presiding over that meeting? You got it, none other than Akron's owner and the league's secretary-treasurer, Art Ranney. So yeah, with that little, let's call it a home field advantage, the Pros were officially voted the champions, and they were awarded the Brunswick Balkan Colander Cup.
But the story of the Akron Pros, their legacy, it goes way beyond just that controversial first championship. Because right in that moment of glory, they were also making a totally different and maybe even more profound kind of history.
The very next season, 1921, their star player, a guy named Fritz Pollard, was named co-coach of the team. And that right there made him the first black head coach in the entire history of the NFL. I mean, think about that. This was an absolutely monumental achievement, something that was decades ahead of its time.
And that's him, right there. Fritz Pollard, in the 1920 team photo. He was this phenomenal breakaway runner, a true pioneer of the game. And he was later joined on that team by another absolute legend, the great Paul Robeson. So the Pros weren't just champions, they were genuine trailblazers.
But wow, their fall was just as fast as their rise to the top. After finishing in first place in 1920, just 3 years later, by 1923, they had plunged all the way down to 16th place. The truth is, the financial realities of running a pro football team in the 1920s they were brutal.
They just couldn't keep up financially. The team had to suspend operations after the 1926 season, and then just 2 years later, they officially surrendered their NFL franchise. Just like that, the league's first ever champions were gone, for good.
So, when we look back at all of this, why does this short-lived, long-forgotten team still matter so much to the story of the NFL?
When you really boil it down, the Akron Pros have this incredible, unique triple legacy. First, they were founders who literally helped build the league from the ground up. Second, they were champions, the very first team to ever win the title. And third, they were pioneers, breaking racial barriers at a time when that was almost unheard of. Their whole story is just this powerful reminder of how fragile, how chaotic the NFL's beginnings really were.
So the origin story of the NFL champions, it's not buried in Green Bay or Chicago, it's right there in Akron, Ohio. And it really makes you wonder, right? What other central pieces of history, in sports or anywhere else for that matter, have just been forgotten and are sitting there waiting to be rediscovered?